Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. President Biden is now vowing to make the terrorists pay for the deadly suicide bomber attacks yesterday at Kabul Airport. More than 100 people were killed, including 13 U.S. service members.
The danger is far from over. The United States is frantically rushing to evacuate the remaining Americans with just 4 days left. And the terrorists could strike again at any moment. Jennifer Wishon has the story.
President Biden wanted to get out of Afghanistan to avoid more casualties. But after the deadliest day for American troops there since 2011, more attacks are expected. And critics say America and other countries are now less safe.
Follow the water.
U.S. troops are continuing their near impossible mission to evacuate an estimated 1,000 remaining Americans and tens of thousands of Afghan allies, under constant threat of another attack from ISIS-K, or ISK, short for the Islamic State of Khorasan province.
We believe it is their desire to continue those attacks, and we expect those attacks to continue. And we're doing everything we can to be prepared for those attacks.
The U.S. relying on the Taliban, a group that spent years working to kill Americans to prevent terrorists from entering the airport's perimeter. The president promising retaliation for the 13 American lives lost.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
ISK is the regional affiliate of ISIS in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And while not as organized as the Taliban, it's much more extreme and violent.
Some of them are disaffected Taliban that joined IS because they thought the Taliban were too soft.
The jihadis have notoriously attacked a girls' school, hospital, even a maternity ward.
They attacked a maternity, shot to death babies, pregnant women.
The tragedy Thursday postponing the president's meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett until today. Meanwhile, critics argue the West is now facing greater terrorist threats because of the Biden administration's gravely botched exit from Afghanistan. The hundreds of jihadists released from prisons with the Taliban victory are already on the attack. More Americans will become targets and far beyond the borders of Afghanistan, writes the Wall Street Journal editorial board. A new poll from YouGov finds 68% of Americans believe the U.S. withdrawal has been handled badly, including 55% of Democrats. And now, with just 4 days remaining before the president's August 31st deadline to withdraw, it appears Afghanistan has again become a haven for terrorists, with America and her allies once again in their crosshairs. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Well, our senior international correspondent, George Thomas, is now with us. And George, what can you tell us about the differences between the Taliban and ISIS-K?
Well, the two main differences, Gordon, is that ISIS-K, known as the Islamic State of Khorasan, they have global ambitions. They're not just concerned about Afghanistan. Their goal is to create this Islamic caliphate. We call it a caliphate. What does that mean? It means an Islamic empire. And we saw them trying to do that in Iraq, in Syria, in the last couple of years after the United States eventually defeated them. The Taliban, they're more concerned about local politics. They're concerned about Afghanistan. What's interesting is that when the Taliban took control of Afghanistan about a week and a half ago, the ISIS-K put out an official statement calling the Taliban apostates and calling their victory delusional. In fact, they say they accuse the Taliban of implementing a deficient version of Islamic law. Now, keep in mind, our viewers know how brutal the Taliban is. ISIS-K thinks the Taliban are fake jihadis.
Well, let's get a map up showing the I guess, traditional boundaries of Khorasan, and that's a huge territory. It goes all the way from Iran to Pakistan. So is that where these are from? Is that the territory that they're claiming is now a new Islamic State?
Exactly. That is their aspirations. As you mentioned, the Khorasan refers historically to that region under the ancient caliphate that once included, as you mentioned, parts of Afghanistan, parts of Iran, as well as Turkmenistan. Again, this is a global ambition. And so when the Taliban took control, and over the last 20 years, they saw their struggle with various elements in the region, be it Al-Qaeda, be it ISIS. And the Taliban, they were, Gordon, focused on Afghanistan. You know, remember, 45 to 50% of Afghanistan is made up of the Pashtun ethnic group. They constitute the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan. They are mainly Sunni Muslim. There's about 15% Shia Muslims in Afghanistan, and the majority of the Taliban are Pashtun. And so their main focus, Gordon, has been about Afghanistan. ISIS-K, as I mentioned, they have global ambitions. And so many in the intelligence community, be it the United States and our coalition partners, they saw the Taliban as sort of a bulwark against ISIS's global ambitions. And so what they did was, under the Trump administration, they went into negotiations for the very first time. They in essence, brought the Taliban to international recognition by inviting them to Doha and signing the Doha Agreement, which eventually led to the United States agreeing to pull out by this time a year later. And so the Taliban, the United States, is banking on the fact that the Taliban, this extremist Islamic group, can run Afghanistan in a way that would bring some semblance of normalcy, of stability. But as we saw yesterday in the horrific attacks at the Hamid Karzai International Airport, there are today various actors in the country that want to destabilize this region. And you can count on it that ISIS-K, even though the United Nations say their numbers are between 500 to 1,200, they will continue to launch attacks. In fact, in a statement when they claimed responsibility yesterday, ISIS said that they accused the Taliban of being, quote, in partnership with the U.S. military to try to evacuate, quote, spies. And they said that they were particularly targeting those individuals that had worked with the U.S. and coalition partners in the last 20 years, as well as Taliban fighters. Keep in mind, about 90-plus Afghans yesterday lost their lives, along with our 13 heroes, the U.S. Marines and one Navy medic.
Let's talk about the list that was turned over to the Taliban, identifying people that were supposed to be evacuated. Is that list now going to be in the hands of ISIS-K? Is that list now going to be a kill list?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've been reporting here for the last 12 days the story about how the United States over the last 20 years, Gordon, we came up with a mechanism to say, OK, those who join the Afghan military join our U.S. forces and coalition partners, those who join NGOs, human rights groups, various other agencies that are trying to bring about a betterment of life in Afghanistan. We have to find out who they are, right? So they created this biometric database of tens of thousands of Afghans who worked with us just to make sure that they are safe. They can come into these various, military installations and so forth. Well, guess what? The reporting has been that that the Taliban has that entire list. And so when the president was pressed yesterday based on a political article that alleged that the United States gave the Taliban checkpoints, the list of individuals that needed to cross into the perimeter close to the Kabul International Airport, they had to have this checkpoint. And the tragedy of tragedies is that once the United States pulls out, is ISIS-K, is Al-Qaeda, is the Taliban going to use that list to go door to door? And there are reports, horrific reports already, that they are actually using that list, using the biometric data, the technology that the United States put together to go after the brave men and women who stood alongside our American forces to do what they did in the last 20 years.
All right, well, George, thanks for that report. Thanks for the information on ISIS-K. Just as a footnote to this, I don't predict that we're even going to be able to get the Americans out of Afghanistan. You ask people to go to the Kabul airport, and then you warn, no, there's going to be a terror attack there, and then there was a terror attack. So how in the world are you going to get anybody out of that situation? We're going to miss this deadline. We're going to miss it badly. In other news, a surge of COVID-19 cases in Israel could mean another lockdown over the upcoming Jewish holidays. Meanwhile, health officials are recommending a third round of vaccinations. There's some very good news. The Israelis are developing a treatment that's showing great promise. Chris Mitchell has the story.
With COVID-19 cases on the rise, Israeli healthcare leaders took the lead in recommending a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine.
It's working, it's safe, and it's the way to defeat this virus.
Although more than 60% of Israelis are fully vaccinated, this latest surge could lead to a fourth lockdown over the upcoming Jewish holidays.
As I said, what we're seeing in Israel right now, even though there is a surge in cases, the level of severe COVID hospitalizations and death is much lower in people who are vaccinated.
Dr. Yair Lewis, a former member of Israel's national coronavirus response, believes there could yet be another surge. Lewis says while the vaccine is important, treatments are crucial.
Obviously, developing therapeutics to treat people who have been infected is something that we should be able to actively protect people who have been infected.
So we have to have a drug as the second line of defense.
And that's the goal of Hebrew University Professor Yaakov Nachmias and his team. CBN News met him last year after they identified that fenofibrate, a drug on the market since 1975, could possibly fight the disease. Clinical trials now show it's working.
And we looked at 15 severe COVID-19 patients. These are patients that had to have oxygen. What we saw is that inflammation, essentially pneumonia, disappeared in just the first 48 hours.
COVID-19 creates an overreaction of the immune system known as a cytokine storm. Instead of fighting the lung infection, it destroys the lung tissue itself.
93% compared to about 25% in the general population could go home without oxygen support in less than a week.
Nachmias says 2 clinical studies on 4 continents are also using the drug for treatment.
One of the things that makes us very excited about fenofibrate is that it has an exceptional safety record. The second thing is that it's incredibly cheap.
At Tel Aviv's Ichilov Hospital, Professor Nadir Arber continues work on an Israeli drug called XOCD24. Earlier this year, he told CBN News about his first round of trials.
And we give it by inhalation. It's very simple. So we enrolled 30 patients in the phase 1. We checked for safety, and the drug was very safe, no side effects whatsoever.
A clinical trial in several Greek hospitals has shown similar results on 90 patients, with about 80 leaving the hospital within 5 days. In the near future, he believes it will be used as an at-home therapy and potentially a platform for treating other similar ailments. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
Oh, that's certainly wonderful news coming out of Israel. We're so focused on vaccinations and booster shots. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there were treatment for this horrible disease?